Man is an enigma whose knot has not ceased to occupy observers. The contradictions that he contains astonish reason and impose silence on it. So what is this inconceivable being who carries within him powers that clash, and who is obliged to hate himself in order to esteem himself? All the beings that surround us have only one law, and follow it in peace. Man alone has two laws, and both of them attracting him at the same time in contrary senses, he experiences an inexplicable tearing. He has a moral end towards which he feels himself obliged to proceed. He has a feeling of his duties and the consciousness of virtue, but an enemy force entices him, and blushing he follows it. All observers agree about this corruption of human nature, and Ovid speaks like St. Paul. I see the better and I approve it, but I follow the worse. My God, what a cruel war! I sense two men within me. Xenophon too, speaking through one of the personages of the Cyropaedia, cries out, Ah, I now know myself, and I painfully experience that I have two souls, one that carries me to the good, and the other that entices me towards the evil. Epictetus warns the man who wants to advance towards perfection to distrust himself like an enemy and a traitor, and the most excellent moralist who ever wrote would not have been wrong to say that the great goal of all our efforts must be to render ourselves stronger than ourselves. On this point, Rousseau cannot contradict the universal conscience. Men are wicked, he says. Sad and continual experience spares the need for proof. However, he adds immediately, with a tranquil pride that makes us burst out laughing, Man is naturally good. I believe I have demonstrated it. As this demonstration is a little watered down in Rousseau's different works, it is good to strip it of its surroundings and present it to the reader reduced to its most simple expression. Man is naturally good, if his vices do not derive from his nature. Moreover, all the vices of man come from society, which is against nature. Therefore, man is naturally good. You can leaf through Rousseau as much as you like, and you will find nothing more on this question. It is on this pile of sand that the great edifices of the Discourse on Inequality, Emile, and even part of the Social Contract rest. His developments of this syllogism are admirable. For example, if you find that adultery disturbs society a bit, Rousseau will immediately reply to you, Why do you marry? Someone takes your wife because you have one. This is your fault. What are you complaining about? In the state of nature, which is good, they did not marry, they coupled. His appetite satisfied, the man no longer needs a given woman, nor the woman a given man. One goes off in one direction, the other in another. This kind of memory, by which one individual gives preference to another for the act of procreation, requires more progress or corruption in human understanding than could be supposed in man in the state of animality. If the spectacle of an unnatural son revolts you, this is again the fault of society, for in the state of nature, children are only linked to their father as long as they need them to preserve themselves. As soon as the need ceases, the natural bond is dissolved. The child is exempt from obedience, as the father is exempt from care. Do thieves displease you? Reflect that it is property that makes thieves, and that property is directly against nature, that according to the wise Locke's axiom very well applied, where there is no property, there is no injury, and that the wars, murders, miseries, crimes, and horrors of all kinds that overwhelm the human race are the work of the first audacious man who, having enclosed a piece of ground, decided to say, This is mine. Tyranny, and all the evils that it produces, have no other source. In effect, what can be the chains of dependence among men who possess nothing? If someone drives me from one tree, I am at liberty to go to another. If someone torments me in one place, who will prevent me from going elsewhere? Is there a man whose strength is sufficiently superior to mine to force me to provide for his subsistence while he remains idle? Should his vigilance relax for a moment, my chains are broken, and he never in his life sees me again, and the tyrant becomes good again. Thus the proof that man is naturally good is that he abstains from all the evil that he is able to commit. Elsewhere, however, Rousseau is more reasonable. In meditating, he says, on the nature of man, I believed I discovered in it two distinct principles, the one good and the other evil. In sensing myself carried away and caught up in the combat of these two contrary notions, I said to myself, No, man is not one. I want and I do not want. I sense myself enslaved and free at the same time. I see the good, I love it, and I do the bad. I will not examine the pitiful conclusion that Rousseau draws from this observation. It would only prove that he never saw anything but the surface of objects, but I will not write on metaphysics. In any case, it is really too bad that Rousseau discovered the evil principle that is in man. Without him, Socrates would have had the priority. One of his most illustrious disciples transmitted to us the ideas of his master on this astonishing contradiction that is in man. Nature, said Socrates, united in this being the principles of sociability and of dissension, for on one side we see that men need to help one another, that they feel pity for the unfortunate, that they have a natural inclination to help each other in their mutual needs, and that they are thankful for the services they receive. But on the other side, if the same object inflames the desires of several, they battle each other for its possession and try to supplant each other. Anger and contestation produces enmity. Covetousness stifles benevolence, and envy gives birth to hate. But if one of the principles discovered in Emile took him baselessly into himself, subjected him to the empire of the senses, and to the passions which are their ministers, of what use is the one which raised him to the study of eternal truths, to the love of justice and moral beauty, and to the regions of the intellectual world whose contemplation is the wise man's delight? Since man is composed of one principle that counsels the good and another that does evil, how can such a being live with his fellows? Hobbes was perfectly right, provided that one does not give too great extension to his principles. Society is really a state of war. We find here the necessity for government. Since man is evil, he must be governed. It is necessary that when several want the same thing, a power superior to the claimants judges the matter and prevents them from fighting. Therefore, a sovereign and laws are needed, and even under their empire is not society still a potential field of battle? And is the action of magistrates anything but a pacifying and permanent power that interposes itself without respite between the citizens to prohibit violence, command peace, and punish the violators of the truce of God? Do we not see that when political revolutions suspend this divine power, unfortunate nations that experience these political commotions quickly fall into a state of war, that force seizes the scepter, and that this nation is tormented by a deluge of crimes? Therefore, government is not a matter of choice. It is even the result of the nature of things. It is impossible that man be what he is, and that he not be governed. For a being both social and evil must be under the yoke. The philosophers of this century who shook the bases of society never ceased to tell us about the views men had in uniting in society. It suffices to cite Rousseau speaking for all of them. Peoples, he says, have given themselves chiefs to defend their freedom and not to enslave themselves. This is a gross error, mother of all others. Man gives himself nothing, he receives everything. He has chiefs because he cannot do without them, and society neither is nor can be the result of a pact. Society is the result of a law. The author of all things, not having judged it appropriate to subjugate man to beings of a superior nature, and man left to be governed by his fellows, it is clear that what is good in man must govern what is evil. Man, like all thinking beings, is tertiary in his nature. This nature possesses an understanding that learns, a reason or a logos that compares and judges, and a love or a will that decides and acts. Although man is weakened in his first two faculties, he is only really wounded in the third, and even here the blow that he received did not deprive him of his original qualities. He wills the evil, but he would will the good. He acts against himself, he turns on himself, he grovels painfully like a reptile whose back has been broken. The half-life that remains to him was expressed very philosophically by an assembly of men in no way philosophers, when they said that the will of man, or his liberty, which is the same thing, is crippled. The laws of justice and moral beauty are engraved in our hearts in indelible characters, and the most abominable scoundrel invokes them every day. See these two brigands who are waiting for the traveller in the forest. They massacre him and strip him. One takes his watch, the other his box, but the box is decorated with diamonds. "This is not fair," cries the first. "It must be divided equally. O divine conscience, your sacred voice does not cease to make itself heard. Always it will make us blush for what we are, always it will warn us of what we can be. However, since this celestial voice always makes itself heard, and even makes itself obeyed whenever man has not been led ignobly into himself by the evil principle that makes him the slave of his senses and of the passions that are their instruments, since man is infallible when his vulgar interest is not placed between his conscience and the truth. He can, therefore, be governed by his fellow, provided that this one has the force to make himself obeyed. For this sovereign power residing on a single head, or on a small number of heads in relation to the subjects, there will necessarily be an infinity of cases where this power will have no interest in being unjust. From this follows the general theory that it is better to be governed than not, and that any association will be more lasting and will move more surely towards its end if it has a chief than if each member preserves his equality with respect to all the others, and that the more the chief is separated from his subordinates, the less contacts he has with them, the more advantageous it will be, because there will be less chance in favour of passion as against reason.